Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is The Current Podcast.
I'm Rebecca Zandbergen, sitting in for Matt Galloway, and this is The Current.
While I wish I could stand before you under better circumstances, I am still honored to rise and present my third budget on behalf of Alberta's government.
Alberta's Finance Minister Nate Horner cut to the chase yesterday. The province is in the red.
If this budget is passed, Alberta will face a deficit of $9.4 billion this fiscal year. That's the reality in front of us. Albertans deserve to hear that first, not last, not softened or buried under technical language. Budget 2026 carries a substantial deficit, one that is significantly higher than projected last year. With this shift, it's clear this year will require tough choices.
Weak oil prices have meant a dip in resource royalties, but Premier Danielle Smith says that's not the only reason for the province's financial troubles. In a televised pre-budget address last week, she pointed to higher immigration.
To sum up our budget challenge, low oil prices combined with an out-of-control federal immigration policies are together driving unsustainable budget deficits, not just here, but across the country.
The Premier went on to say the province will hold a number of referendums this October. Albertans will weigh in on 9 questions about immigration policy and constitutional issues. And another one could be added to the mix. If separatists are successful with their petitioning efforts, a question about whether Alberta should leave the country will be on the ballot as well. So to help us wade through these developments, I'm joined by Kathleen Petty, host of the CBC podcast West of Centre, and Alex Boyd, who reports on Alberta for the Toronto Star. And we've reached both of them in Calgary. Good morning.
Good morning, Rebecca. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, Kathleen.
Kathleen, this is a big deficit. Why so big?
Oil. I mean, anyone who lives in Alberta, Rebecca, gets a ticket to ride the royalty roller coaster, whether we want to get on or not. And sometimes it's a fun ride and sometimes it's not. And this is how we roll in this province. If we look, back over the last couple of decades, truthfully, we've had more deficits than surpluses. But when we have surpluses, they're huge. And when we have deficits, they're equally huge. And I think what was sort of most startling for people confronting the numbers that Nate Horner presented was that there is no path to balance either. He's not predicting we're out of this anytime soon because his projection has, this deficit of $9.4 billion in the coming fiscal year, but deficits for the next 2 as well.
Mm-hmm. And Alex, as I said in the beginning, it's not only oil that Danielle Smith points to as the economic troubles in the province. What else do you make of the framing here?
I mean, in fairness, getting off the royalty roller coaster, as we call it here in Alberta, is a legitimately difficult thing to do. Premiers going back decades have been trying to do it. And frankly, if there was an easy and politically palatable way to do it, it probably would have been done already. But, the 2 big levers that government can pull here is that they can raise more money. That means fees or that means taxes, or they can cut expenses. That means cutting programs that voters are generally attached to. So people aren't huge fans of either of those options. And so what Smith is kind of saying here is, I've found a sneaky third option, which is that I can make more money through fees. I can cut programming, but I'm not going to do it for everyone. I'm going to do it for a certain subset of the population. I'm going to do it for immigrants. I think there's questions there about whether or not the numbers are there to support her thesis that they are the ones who are, unfairly burdening our social services here in the province. But it's a way to kind of explain why there's such an issue here, why we don't have a path to prosperity out of this, that doesn't, have her pointing back at her own government.
Yeah, Kathleen, she says there's out of control federal immigration policies over the years. She says it's financially crippling. But what sort of, her thesis is that? But does she have the numbers to back it up?
Well, let's start with a number we do know. About 18% of the revenue comes from, the oil and gas industry, comes from oil specifically, because that's the big driver of revenue. In terms of expenses, we don't know. I mean, she admitted she doesn't know what the cost is. And Nate Horner said the same thing. He said they don't have the data, that's something they're going to have to look into. And if you take a look at the big population increase, and of course it's ebbed off significantly, Rebecca, But, we did have a huge surge. There's no question about it. And inevitably, that does add cost. But by the same token, many of these people work and they pay taxes as well. So, that also has to be factored in to the calculation, versus, cost versus, financial contribution. In addition to that, the thing that I wonder about, in addition, if you're going to bring in a new structure, which is what she's talking about in terms of having 1-year residency before social supports, user fees for temporary residents, and so forth. Presumably, you also have to expand bureaucracy to do that, either create a new one or expand existing bureaucracies. And there's a cost that comes with that, too. So, I do think we're having a conversation about something I think most people can acknowledge that there probably is a cost. There's no doubt a cost attached, but we actually don't know what the net cost is because neither the Premier nor the Finance Minister has any numbers to back it up.
What's interesting, Alex, is that a number of years ago, 2 years ago, we heard the Premier saying that she really wanted to boost the population in the province, and now suddenly she's saying the numbers are too high. What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we had Smith writing to Trudeau saying, you know what, we need more immigrants, we need more people in the province to do the jobs and do the things that we need to do to build our economy. She was publicly musing about doubling the population of Alberta. So, it wasn't that long ago that immigration was seen as the solution to some of our problems. And when you listen to her address and some of the ways she's been describing this issue, I think the rhetoric is notable. Because, immigration is a policy like any other. We can have a conversation about whether it's doing what we want it to do. The national consensus on immigration has shifted a little bit. People, I think, are increasingly open to a conversation about whether immigration is structured the way we want it to be. But in her address, she was saying things like, immigration is the result of Justin Trudeau's disastrous open border policy, saying things like, Albertans can't afford to support some of these people. When she talks about the burdens placed on classrooms, she specifically singled out the burden presented by kids whose first language isn't English. And so I think when people see rhetoric like that, they argue that this is leaving the realm of a policy conversation and becoming more of a political conversation, because she seems to be drawing a line between who is an Albertan and who is not. And again, if she's making an argument here, it's that these are the folks that are responsible for some of the problems that her government is facing. It's not her government, it's these other folks.
Kathleen, do you think she's drawing that line between who's an Albertan and who's not because the public sentiment is there? There are Albertans who want to hear that, who support that idea?
Well, I think there's more broadly sort of an acknowledgement, I think, across the country, to be fair, that immigration was beyond what the country could absorb, and certainly Alberta could absorb. So it's sort of comparing that rhetoric with the rhetoric that Alex rightly points out about Smith wanting to double the population of the province to 10 million by 2050. I mean, even Red Deer, she talked about that city growing to 1 million, and it's got just over 100,000 residents. But, parsing this rhetoric is not helped by the guy who runs her Calgary office, because he posted, quote, "Why import from nations with failed systems when our Judeo-Christian heritage and principles have worked so well?" So then that feeds into people sort of wondering about, what the dog whistle might be there. But if you, take a look at the government's posting on what the questions will be on immigration, I mean, they're very sort of simplistic. It starts with more, they listed immigration and social programs, more Alberta control over immigration. But the next one says benefits for legal residents only, suggesting that we have a bunch of residents that are illegal. Mm-hmm. And of course, temporary foreign workers aren't illegal. Temporary foreign students are not illegal. So I think it does sort of, muck up the understanding. And I think there has to be sort of a clearer explanation and articulation of what the policy is and who exactly she's talking about, because I think it's entirely unclear for Albertans at this stage exactly what they'll be voting on and what it might mean. And let's also add that a lot of what she is asking Albertans, she could just go ahead and do.
Yeah, we'll get to some of that in a moment, the referendum questions. But I do want to go first to opposition NDP leader Naheed Nenshi. He argued the deficit's not because of immigration or the population boom. He says it's because the government's making poor choices. Have a listen.
The Premier dodges, ducks, and blames. She distracts. She's distracting us with a referendum that'll cost us $50 million. She distracts us with a healthcare restructuring that has cost hundreds of millions of dollars. She fuels separatism, which we know has dried up investment and job creation in this province. Anything to shift your attention away from her terrible record.
Alex, to what degree do you think the NDP is able to get traction with this?
I think that's the big question when it comes to the NDP. Nenshi was elected with a lot of fanfare as the leader of the party to replace Rachel Notley. But since then has really struggled, I think, to get the message out there to, portray themselves as a viable opposition to Smith. Even as Smith's support has softened a little bit in the polls, that hasn't really translated in a bump in support for Nenshi. So I think there's going to be a lot of eyes on him this week to see if this is an opportunity in which they're actually able to get their message out there and actually start getting some traction among Albertans.
Kathleen, you talked about the referendum questions. There are 9 questions being put to Albertans this fall with the potential for more, as we heard. Just walk us through what all of them are. The Coles Notes version, I suppose. And you've already said that you didn't think there needs to be these questions directed in this way to Albertans.
No, well, I mean, a lot of this she could just pursue. Obviously, more control over immigration. That's a conversation she is going to have with the feds. But in terms of what social supports and how they're doled out, I think that's a policy she could pursue without going to a referendum. Is really more my point. And then there are a number of constitutional questions. Provinces choosing their own judges. Again, she could also negotiate with the federal government on that one. But abolishing the federal Senate, obviously, that's a constitutional amendment, opting out of federal programs and keeping the funds, having provincial laws supersede federal laws in areas of shared jurisdiction. And in all these cases, she needs to, negotiate, get other provinces on side and amend the Constitution. And I think most Canadians have a pretty good idea of how difficult it is to amend the Constitution. And then adding to that, if the petition campaign is successful right now on a question on separation, adding that to the ballot as well. But, we had a referendum years ago that I think most people will remember on equalization. And it, do you support it or, you're for or against? And Albertans said they were against. And precisely nothing's changed as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. Alex, what do you think of the Premier getting into the debating this separatist movement and whether or not Albertans want to separate? There's a bit of a risk-reward breakdown here for that.
Oh, yeah, there's a huge risk reward. And she's been walking this line for months now. The political math in Alberta is such that if you want to be premier of a conservative party, and keep your job, you need to make sure that all conservatives within the province are more or less united. And that's a pretty, diverse group here in Alberta. That includes kind of your more mainstream, middle of the road conservatives, but then it also, includes more of the fringe folks, which at this current moment includes a lot of people who are angry enough at Ottawa that they're threatening to leave the country. And so what we've seen from her again and again and again is, she's given little bones to the separatists. She's made it a little bit easier for them to move forward with the referendum. She's told them repeatedly that their grievances are valid. People, I think, get really hung up on the idea of whether or not Smith is herself a separatist. I'm personally in the camp of we don't have enough information to know. But regardless of why she's doing it, because she believes in the cause or because she's just trying to keep her party united, she has made it much easier for them to express their grievances. But it's interesting with these referendum questions that you could argue that she has taken some of those grievances or some of the things they're angry about with respect to Alberta's relationship to Ottawa and created them as referendum questions. And so I think you could say maybe she's trying to undercut the separatists here, because I can imagine there's a lot of folks in Alberta who are angry at Ottawa, but not not angry enough to actually, separate from the country. And so these sorts of questions might appeal to them. On the other hand, she is also validating this idea that it is a fair opinion to have in Alberta to be so angry at Ottawa that we need to, fundamentally reshape some of these relationships.
Kathleen, what do you think? Is the wind coming out of the sails, the separatist sails as a result, or is she just providing more oxygen to it?
Well, I will say, actually, the separatists hate this idea, right? They don't want their question lumped in with all the other ones, so they actually do see it as a problem. But Alex's point is a good one, because that's sort of the calculation people are trying to discern with Danielle Smith, and I sort of refer to it as what she actually wants is a la carte federalism, which is sort of like sovereignty by stealth. I mean, she keeps talking about, a sovereign Alberta within the United Canada. Well, it's sort of the Alberta version of sovereignty association, for those who remember the referendum in Quebec in 1980. And so bit by bit, she's trying to assert and pursue, authority over different areas that would normally be within the federal purview. And to an extent, a lot of these questions that she wants to put to the people in the middle of October is about accomplishing that. But again, I have to go back, I feel like a broken record, to, the ability to amend the Constitution. I mean, the amending formula makes it, virtually impossible to amend it. And I have to say, I'm not sure, Alex, I don't know what you think, but I'm not sure how many people are losing sleep over an unelected Senate. I mean, they may not sort of at first blush like it very much, but, on a list of priorities, I'm thinking that's not topping the list.
Alex, what do you think?
That's the first time I'd thought about the Senate in a while. So where that is coming from, news to me.
And so I am curious, remind our listeners, Alex, where are her popularity numbers right now?
She still is pretty popular. She's been able to kind of walk this line of appealing to middle of the road conservatives in the province, while not totally alienating the separatists and the folks who are less enthused by her inability to be a little bit more, more supportive of some of their policies. But, to quote Janet Brown, who's a pollster here in Alberta, Albertans will forgive a lot when oil is booming and the economy is good. But as soon as oil turns down, that goodwill starts evaporating pretty quickly.
Yeah. Where do you think, Kathleen, she goes from here then? I mean, if she's, gunning towards an election in a little while, what are her chances of keeping the rhetoric in her favor when there are deficits this big?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see the extent to which these deficit numbers are, I guess, blamed on her governance and competence, because, going back to the NDP and what their opportunity might be, I think that's where they're headed, based on the rhetoric, is they're trying to demonstrate that as an example, essentially, of incompetence and not being able to manage the finances of this province. And, it's worth noting, like, Alberta is got the strongest, or at least, I haven't seen the latest numbers, but I think we have the strongest economy in the country right now. And if we don't, we're sort of right up there. And certainly going forward, even though the finance minister tried to dampen down that, but you look at other forecasts, we should be leading the country. So there is that sort of contradiction, I think, in people's minds. We have this strong economy, and yet we have this massive deficit, and deficits, as far as the eye can see. And, people are bound to try and figure out who to point fingers at on this. And that is part of the problem here. Everyone is perhaps pointing in different directions.
We'll leave it there. Kathleen and Alex, thank you very much for this.
Good to talk to you, Rebecca.
Kathleen Petty is the host of CBC's West of Centre podcast. Alex Boyd reports on Alberta for the Toronto Star.